Now, speaking of partners, whether you talk about the draft or whether you talk about free agency, seems like you always need a partner in crime in the NBA in order to do whatever deal it is that needs to be done. Now, the first 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we'll call it the first couple of moves, if you will. 2 out of the 3 moves at least did not require a partner. But of course, the third move on behalf of the Hawks did last night. So we talked about the fact that Landry Fields, I wouldn't say tipped his hand necessarily, but kind of sort of tipped his hand when he was asked last week about the possibilities of what he would do in the draft. 2 things he said that I want to go back to before we get into it. And I want to ask what your thoughts were as well on that. Here's what Landry Fields had to say as far as whether or not they were actually going to stand pat at 15. He said, yeah, it was very likely. It was a high probability. So that kind of told you all you needed to know, right? Again, our guy, Jeff Schultz from The Athletic, asked that question. I then followed up and said, hey, are you looking for a guy that is more about the internal focus for this Hawks team versus maybe kind of looking over your shoulder and seeing what the rest of the Eastern Conference is looking to do? And he said, yeah, we're actually okay with looking internally to see where we want to fit people in, who fit the culture, who fit what we're trying to do, and then ultimately to develop them from there. So considering those 2 main mentions that Landry Fields said just a week ago, Dylan, are you shocked, or do you feel like last night's draft was a confirmation of what he said last week?
It was definitely a confirmation. I mean, he basically stayed true to what he said he was going to do and what the organization was going to do. He also talked about it in that press you're speaking about, how they were okay getting a guy who was maybe more on the developmental side than an instant impact type of dude. And I think Kobe Bufkin, who was the 15th overall pick, I think he is a guy who was definitely a little bit developmental, but I do think that he could possibly have a chance. I mean, just like any rookie could have a chance, but I think he does have a chance to, maybe play a little bit more than most people may think because of what he provides on the defensive end. Very good defensive player, can shoot a little bit too. So he can play off ball. So he has some tools that could allow him to maybe play a little bit earlier than expected, but I do think at the end of the day that we're going to see him play probably a little bit more in College Park than we see him play in Atlanta in State Farm Arena. But I know, Tenitra, you feel like it was slightly underwhelming.
Yes.
But I actually like the pick. I gotta be honest. I actually like the pick. I like what Kobe can provide. Again, you talk about his ability to move off the ball and be good either on the ball or off the ball. He talked about that in his post-game press conference last night. And he said he could do either one, and that could take pressure off of Trey and or DeJounte, and then he could also move off the ball. So we talked about it yesterday. We never really saw that Trae Young off-ball movement that we expected to see when DeJounte Murray did come to town last season around this time last year. So maybe Kobe is a guy who can fill that role, and he could be that off-the-ball guy, and he can be the one getting set up by Trae Young and or DeJounte Murray. So, he could be a 3-and-D guy, a guy who could be your backup point guard, who at times could be both. So I like the versatility. And also we have to talk about the improvements Kobe made from year 1 to year 2 during his time at Michigan. 22% three-point shooter in year 1 as a freshman, jumped all the way up to 35.
Yeah, that is impressive.
36% in year 2. So the improvements is there. Obviously, starting the points were a big jump as well, went from 3 to 14. I think that's more of a product of him getting more minutes. But really, for me, it's a 3-point percentage. So he's working on his game. Seems like a bit of a gym rat. So he's got some qualities that you like to see in any young player.
He does indeed. And one of the things that I like about him as well is you're under the tutelage of Juwan Howard. So he's someone who knows how to give you all the tools that you're going to need and to help you to understand the importance of being a two-way player. And really and truly, if you want to get minutes, as we saw last season, when you look at Jalen Johnson and the increase in his minutes and maybe the decrease in AJ Griffin's minutes, I think a lot of that was because Jalen Johnson was able to give a defensive presence, especially bring some help at least on the perimeter. And so wherever you can bring that help defensively, that's a good thing. And you think about those breaks that Trae Young wanted to take at the end, or really always has taken, not wanted to take, but has taken at the end of the first quarter. And in some cases, the beginning of the second quarter, when you have a guy like Bufkin in the space, in the mix, you may have a little bit more confidence. Should he be on the main roster as opposed to the Skyhawks, you have the confidence that, hey, he's going to give you just enough in the way of a 3-point shooter for that second unit, but also, which may be more important, is he's going to provide you with that defensive presence, and he has a desire to play defense, because that's what Quinn Snyder is looking for. He's looking for more players who are willing, interested, and able to either be two-way players or are open to learning how to become better two-way players. So I think that's one of those things that ultimately makes him a little bit more appealing. I think for me, the disappointment wasn't so much in Bufkin or even Seth Lundy or even Mouhamed Gueye. That piece wasn't it for me. I was just hoping against hope, because I really did feel like they were going to stick with those picks. I was just hoping against hope that maybe they were going to do some type of packaging of a deal such that they could maybe use what little draft capital they had left to maybe move to put themselves in position to get a player. And hey, that's not to say that they're done, right? We can start that conversation about free agency next week, assuming they're not going to do anything over the weekend, but you never know. But ultimately speaking, it's kind of like, no, we're looking at what we have in the here and now, and what you have in the here and now indeed would be 3 developmental players. But I will tell you this, I thought that it was interesting because, of course, we talked about a couple different players last night, but Kassan Wallace went very quickly. So did Derek Lively. And those were kind of the two that everyone was bantering about. And so it became obvious, okay, wow, where did the Hawks go now? And then, of course, they go out and pick Mouhamed Gueye, acquiring the draft rights to that pick that went to the Celtics. Now, that is a work in progress. But I thought that was interesting because we also spoke last night about the possibilities of the shifting around of the front court. And what it could mean if you exit someone like John Collins, or even if you exit someone like Clint Capella, who and what do you need to backfill that? And how do you bring depth in that space? Although you do have it a little bit. You've got Jalen Johnson, you've got Sadiq Bey, and you probably could shift. AJ Griffin is kind of a chameleon to me. To me, he could probably go 2, 3, or 4 and be quite fine. But where do you kind of bolster those guys who kind of sit at the 4 or 5? And maybe that's what he is. Albeit a developmental player, may take a couple years to bring him there. But I thought that it was interesting that this was yet another piece from last night's draft for the Hawks, that Mower spoke to the future versus maybe the now. And again, let's be honest, unless you're selecting in the top 5, maybe the top 8, you're not looking at the guy to be your win now guy anyway. But again, I was just thinking, well, heck, if we're going to stay in the draft, okay, that's what we're going to do. But okay, that's just me. I'm just going to sit back and wait for free agency.
There you go. Just sit back and see, what the move didn't come last night, but that's not to say, like you said, it won't come. But I think you're absolutely right about Mouhamed Gueye. That seems like when you've been talking about playing chess and not checkers, that seems like it could be maybe that chess move, or at least doing a really good job of maybe looking ahead into the future and, knowing that the end could be coming up on Clint Capella, or knowing maybe a move could possibly be coming with John Collins, and you have to make sure you're set up for the after, what's after that move. So I do think that could be a piece there. And again, a developmental guy. And sometimes, look, a lot of times it usually takes guys a couple of years to really bloom, for lack of a better term. So, that's why there's no rush on a guy like Mouhamed Gueye. You can kind of take that chance, and you can make a move like that because you do have Clint, and you can have a few more years with Clint, and you don't have to rush this guy. So, I think that was one of those moves that you've talked about these past couple of days in playing chess, not checkers. So I like the move. We'll see what he turns into, but I definitely think he could be a guy you might want to just keep your peripheral vision on going into the next few seasons.
Right. And I think one thing that did make me a little more comfortable today, Dylan, was a report that came out from Brian Windhorst from ESPN. And so if that report has some weight to it, he said that there has been sort of an edict put out there, for lack of a better term, that the Hawks really need to do away with the luxury tax and kind of get from under it. So if that information is indeed accurate, then the moves last night make perfect sense. But everydayers, what do you guys think? I mean, we'd love to hear from you. Were you okay? Do you feel like the Hawks made some solid moves since they did decide to go ahead and keep their 2 picks and then actually add another to the fold? Or were you looking for them to do something different than what they did? And if you like the picks, what do you like about them? You know where you can tell us, right? You can drop comments at our YouTube channel. And of course, it's ATL Day Ones all day, every day. You can check us out each and every day No matter what, we're always here for you. And if you're driving down the road in Atlanta, it's supposed to be a beautiful weekend. Why don't you go ahead and download us wherever you download your podcast as well? Because, hey, we're your team every day, talking about your teams every day. Now, we're going to continue a little bit of our NBA draft talk, but we're going to shift it into the fun part in For the Culture, because, hey, that's what we like to do. We like to just have a little fun, kicks and giggles, nothing we take seriously in For the Culture.